don't really have a full understanding of government systems and processes. And so with this panel, what we hope to do is bring together professionals who've been grappling with some of these questions to talk about their experience of engaging with different people. And again, I'm not going to use the word state. Let's use the word different people, because the state is made up of people. And how important is an understanding of this nuts and bolts for this effect, for this relationship to be stronger? What do we even mean when we say citizen-state engagement?
I think just the term governance itself is something we need to engage with to know what kind of relationship any of us will have with the state. Because is it a democratic state or not? Because governance extends over many things, and somewhere we have to be able to anchor ourselves to certain principles. And therefore, I really would have preferred something like democratic governance, because those are the things that we have latched ourselves onto for 30 years, and we will into the future as well, because that's something on which we have a common agreement. Even within our constitutional principles, it is democratic governance that is a key which gives us a role at various levels. That's where we can get to the nuts and bolts of it. That what is the nuts and bolts of democratic governance, not just the vote, but a nut and bolt at policy, at implementation. Something Ambedkar, for instance, articulated right at the beginning. And it's something we are facing just now, that where do you deal with a majoritarian thing, whether you're dealing with it at a national level or in a Gram Sabha? What kind of democracy are you looking at? And unless you look at a social democracy where the most marginalized have an equal voice, not just because their numbers are smaller or not just because they are weaker economically or socially. And why is civil society working? It's working to work for the benefit of those who do not have access to power. So how do you use all these frameworks are extremely important.
So how do you build up trust? I think that's sort of the main challenge over here. And I think it's, first of all, by communication. People just need to talk more and have civil conversations as opposed to sort of, screaming at each other. We need to design things properly. Quite often, a lot of partnerships and collaborations collapse because of poor design. Incentives have to be realigned. And that's something I learned at the Center for Civil Society about public choice, is that each state player or each player in this game has a different interest. Politicians need to get re-elected. Bureaucrats want a larger budget. The private sector wants to make money. The voters want everything for free. The consumers want it at the cheapest price. How do you bring all of that together? And that's the challenge over here that we have. And if you don't have something which takes all of that into account, you're going to have a collapse coming along the way. And finally, you can't ignore the grassroots. As Arun Maira said, we need local solutions to solve global systemic problems. And if people at the top believe that they have all the answers and we're ignoring the grassroots, we have a problem.
I think over time, what I've come to see is that governance is about decision making. And, effectively, if one wanted to distill at least what it has grown to mean to me over the years, it's about the quality of decision making. How is the decision happening? Who all are involved? In what manner does it play out? Is it really meeting a felt, end? In that story of, change which affects the community, which all of us in this room are a part of, the government is effectively the largest decision maker. How does one see the various civil society actors and their engagement with government? And I distribute it into, some of these players. One is the segment that looks at implementation, which is, last mile access, and club it with this fact about information gaps. So the way I think for a large part of these debates have been defined as rights-based and service delivery, and we may have bones to pick with either definitions. But I have seen, at least, I think in the last few years, a lot of these come together, and I would put them in one bucket of people trying to solve problems of access and information. Access to services or information about what is due to you, and making them come together so people actually get what they need. And that, I think, is one very large bucket where a lot of our grassroots civil society actors would be in. The next segment, I would put, and some could be a bit of an overlap, are community-based organizations. So where we would have our water user associations, farmer groups, where the groups are a part of the institution itself. A third group, which I think links up with this community-owned group, would be folks which we don't, I think, normally define as civil society, but I would think the Gram Sabha, ward sabhas, citizen participation forums where decisions are getting made and getting influenced and have a lot of power, or can have a lot of power, but may not have it today. That would be, another segment. A fourth would be, of course, individuals. And I think the citizen as an individual, we look at the organized form, of course, as the CSO, but the individual, and that individual could play a role of us as individual citizens, but also as, cases where fellowships happen. And of course, think tanks and academia. I'm putting think tanks and academia in a similar kind of bucket because they are in a position to review, evaluate, work on information, knowledge systems, capacity building, and plug in those pieces of the puzzle. In terms of stakeholders who are maybe not defined as civil society, but who are very important in this governance conversation, I would also include the private sector, which is coming in with certain specific solutions, which start now getting piloted in municipalities or districts, and a lot of technology players.
There is no question that we need an equivalent to the Gram Sabha in urban areas, and it's been being tried for some time, and we are moving in that direction, whether it's Mohalla Sabhas or whether it's breaking down the ward in certain ways, or whether it's trying to have sabhas around particular issues.
Actually, we have systems like this, at least in Mumbai, and I'm not an expert on local management, but we have something called the ALM, the Advanced Locality Management Groups. And they've been pretty effective in getting civil society, activists, prominent citizens to get together in their own locality and talk to the government, to the local authorities about what needs to be done in terms of waste management, encroachment, tree cutting, etc., etc. And it actually struck me when a friend of mine in Singapore told me how she's very involved in her local government over there and this fabulous system that Singapore has. And I said, wow, it sounds great. And I suddenly realized it's like the ALM system in Mumbai. And basically it's about, how can you get information that's happening at the ground level, which can impact the decision making at the top? Because if you don't have data, you cannot sort of, take proper decisions. And then that's where I guess Poornima sort of the forte also is like, how do you improve the level of quality of data? The two ways of either you sort of have the current system, but you have more participation from below. But bear in mind, there's also got to be an issue of accountability. I love to see so many people criticizing, but they don't want to take accountability for their actions. So I think we need to get the voice of the people heard, but decision making has to be taken by someone who's then held accountable.
So from the tiniest of mechanisms, let's say in NREGA, there are about maybe 500 points of different kinds of interaction. On a work site itself, there are so many points. Each one of them require thought on quality of decision making, what Poornima and Luis just talked about. But it's not just the quality to my mind comes with who is part of that debate and discussion. So it should be online, it should be real time, and it should be open. The NREGA website is used by academics, by think tanks, by people, by politicians in parliament, by the media all over, because it is open, it is online, and it is transaction based. So that side of digital governance, which is not only a question of information, it's also the processes. For years, they've been saying, oh, if you get all these databases, you won't have to fill 100 forms. They've not been doing that. But now in certain areas, through that digital dialogue, we are also getting, as soon as a silicosis patient gets their certificate of being silicosis, they don't have to apply for anything. Their pension begins immediately because that data exists with government. They just never have used it. They make people run around. So often digital governance is called digital governance for efficiency, but you find you get the worst of both worlds.
There is this misconception that digital needs to be on a platform or as a dashboard, and that is the way in which information needs to be consumed. I'll give you one example. So we've been working with a number of district authorities on how the village development planning process can happen in a participatory way, where we've done a mix of both PRA as well as household surveys to capture what is the felt need from the ground and build that into the village development plan. So then that feeds into the GPDP, etc. Now, in that process, what we also learned is that if that plan has to get discussed at the Gram Sabha, while we may do something on the technology side and have it as a drop-down menu for the DC, which makes it much easier for the district administration and their teams to look at information and process it. If the Gram Sabha has to take decisions and if they need to be accountable with that information, then converting that village development plan into a wall painting has been a very useful exercise.
Two very big challenges just now. COVID is one challenge, and it's changed how much we can meet face to face, what can be done. Governments are struggling, they struggle for resources. But those principles of transparency and accountability and democratic governance should hold us in good stead, and we have to keep fighting for it. And there are innumerable examples of where they have actually been of value.
I think COVID has underlined the importance of the need to be able to identify where the vulnerable are and what needs to be done for them in ways that has been unprecedented. Earlier, I think people thought it was okay to figure it out when a program gets designed. The need to have things like this ready in your hand and to be able to do something about it, I think has been extremely important. Sustainability, I think two words, consistency of the effort to push on whichever issue that one is working on, and finding ways to embed it within the overall government superstructure.
I think the lesson from COVID is listen to the grassroots. We've heard it also from both Nikhil and Poornima about how do you know what's happening, how do you identify the people who are vulnerable, etc. So it's listening to the grassroots and figuring out what's happening at the ground. In terms of sustainability, it's, I think, three words: design, start, and agile. What that means is you've got to design it properly. Start means get it started. I mean, don't wait for the perfect solution. Start on something. And agile is, keep tweaking it so that it's, the glitches get sort of corrected and work out.